As machine learning technology advances, we hear more and more about the potential it has in impacting society. AI has the capacity to help humans do all the things we don't want to do, and all the things we cannot do. And in fact, machine learning methods are already being integrated into our daily lives. This ranges in application from social media algorithms to hiring employees. Even the music playing in the background of this video was generated by machine learning. As this kind of technology becomes increasingly pervasive in our society, we have to address the question of ethics. Now, there's a lot to look at when it comes to ethics, but what we want to focus on is the issue of bias. Machine learning has the capacity to be really beneficial, and has even begun to be framed as a method of removing biases, but many have argued that this perception of AI is flawed, and that in reality, artificial intelligence does carry bias in its own way. Proponents of this view have gone on to say that these biases can be even more detrimental than human bias, because in machine learning, we don't have a complete understanding of how or why these biases came to be.
Before we get started, let's define some of the key terms we will be using in our discussion. For one, when we're talking about machine learning, we're referring to systems that have the ability to progressively improve their performance without being explicitly told to do so. One objection to machine learning agents is that we are often unable to completely understand the processes. Because these systems are learning things on their own, we don't know much about what leads them to their produced outcomes. This issue is commonly referred to as the black box problem, or a lack of interpretability. Those in favor of utilizing machine learning argue that algorithmic models allow AI agents to be purely objective, in performing based on logic rather than personal experience and emotion in the way that humans do. AI agents should theoretically be able to bypass discriminatory behavior. They are also able to pull and process data at a faster rate than humans, which maximizes productivity and saves both time and money.
This all sounds great, theoretically, but unfortunately these ideas don't always hold up. Those speaking out against machine learning practices have pointed out numerous instances of harmful algorithmic bias. Sophia Noble, for example, outlines the racist, sexist tendencies of Google's search algorithm in her book Algorithms of Oppression. She described her shock when her search for the phrase "black girls" produced pages full of pornography. These kinds of discriminatory results pop up all the time, pointing to the idea that Google is perhaps not the democratic supermarket of ideas it is framed as.
The negative implications of these kinds of algorithms go beyond search results too. In her book Automating Inequality, Virginia Eubanks outlines numerous cases of machine learning bias in American public service algorithms. In Pittsburgh, machine learning techniques were used to predict children's vulnerability to parental abuse and neglect. However, the overlap between markers of neglect and traits of poverty caused the model to inflate impoverished parents as risk to their children. This meant that every time parents reached out for help from public services or called abuse hotlines, they would be placed under statistical scrutiny. In another case in Indiana, a machine learning algorithm wrongfully denied food stamps to roughly 1 million people in need of government aid over 3 years. These kinds of cases are often attributed to the black box problem we talked about earlier. Our inability to understand a system's processes makes it nearly impossible to identify what causes discriminatory outcomes. With human beings, we're able to get a sense of why decisions are made, even if they're biased decisions. We cannot necessarily get this with algorithms, and so the problem of algorithmic bias falls under a whole different domain. Not only do we not fully grasp the processes of AI, but we also don't know what kinds of data or how much data they're analyzing. The strong processing power of machines allows them to take in all kinds of information, including data that invades privacy. A company's hiring algorithm, for example, may pull data about an applicant's race, religion, political affiliations, and personal history without ever being explicitly coded to do so. Beyond that, algorithms have the capability to predict an applicant's probability of developing mental or physical illnesses in the future, or even getting pregnant. In a hiring agent, these probabilities can be factored in the decision-making process, and due to the lack of interpretability, nobody would realize it was happening.
Clearly, machine learning is not the almighty solution to overcoming prejudice. However, the technology itself isn't necessarily the problem either. The reality is, machine learning technology does not exist within a vacuum. Most AI systems are created by being fed tons and tons of data that comes from our current society, and since our current society is riddled with bigotry, it should come as no surprise that these systems produce biased outcomes. Lack of interpretability is definitely spooky, but it isn't the only issue or the most important one. Black box problem aside, as long as our training sets are inherently discriminatory, our algorithms will produce discriminatory outcomes. The quest to completely interpretable systems is also counterintuitive in many ways. After all, one of the main allures of AI is its ability to perform tasks that humans can't. If we want systems to do things we are fundamentally unable to, we can't expect to fully understand the process. And anyways, even if we were able to understand, having a human parse through all the data that it processes contradicts the whole purpose of utilizing machine learning. To use machine learning in an ethical way, we need to step back from the idea that it is a quick and easy hack to bypassing prejudice. Machine learning absolutely does not lack bias, but what it often does lack is the compassion and wisdom of trained human professionals, especially in cases where human rights are at stake. Machine learning is flawed, and we can't just offload human-centered problems onto them. Most importantly, we need to accept that machine learning biases are merely reflective of existing human issues. We cannot remove the discriminatory bias from AI systems without also working towards removing discriminatory bias from society. Social hierarchies that exist will inevitably extend into our digital lives if we don't address them. Algorithms are tools, and the responsibility is on human designers to decide whether they fuel injustice or promote equity.